For 15 years, she lived like a ghost. No one knew the woman in the quiet coastal town had once been one of the most feared black ops snipers in the world. But the night an intruder broke into her home, he learned the truth the hard way because she never missed a target. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Her name was Celine Vera, and in San Isidro Bay, she was known simply as the widow with the bookshop. To strangers she was invisible, the sort of person whose quietness made her blend into the background. To neighbors she was dependable but distant, a woman who smiled politely but rarely lingered in conversation. Children adored her fresh pastries and the bedtime stories she told during book club afternoons. Fishermen along the docks knew her for her unflinching gaze toward the sea, as though she were waiting for something that would never return. What no one knew was that Celine's gaze had once scanned war zones, deserts, and jungles with the precision of a hawk. That her hands, so gentle when she turned the pages of books, had steadied rifles capable of piercing armor from impossible distances. She was not just a soldier, she had been a weapon honed by the most secretive unit the world never officially acknowledged. Her code name during those years was Never Miss, a sniper so precise that entire missions hinged on her breath control and trigger squeeze. And then 15 years she disappeared. To the world she had been declared dead. To herself she had buried her identity, layer by layer, until nothing remained but Celine the widow, Celine the shopkeeper, Celine the quiet woman by the sea. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But the past never dies, it only waits. The storm that night had rolled over San Isidro like an omen. Rain lashed against the window panes, thunder rattled the old beams of her coastal home, and lightning cast fractured shadows across the floorboards. Celine was closing up her shop when she felt it, that prickling at the back of her neck, the sense she had not experienced in years. The unmistakable weight of being watched. At first, she dismissed it. The storm, she told herself, just the storm and her own restless memories. But then came the soft groan of her back door, the one that never opened unless forced. Celine stilled, her hand hovered near the lamp, her ears straining. A floorboard creaked. He had come in quietly, but not quietly enough. The intruder thought he had chosen well, a woman alone, a storm to mask his movements, a small coastal town with no nearby police station. He was confident, too confident, moving like someone who had stalked prey before. Celine caught the gleam of metal in his hand as lightning flashed through the window, a knife, a hunter's tool. He thought she was prey, but the moment he shifted his stance, Celine's body reacted before her mind could catch up. Her muscles remembered every lesson, every ambush survived, every kill made under impossible pressure. Her pulse slowed instead of racing, her breath came steady, as if she were sighting down a scope again. 15 years of restraint broke apart in an instant. She moved with frightening precision. One pivot, one strike, one twist of his wrist, the knife clattered to the floor. He gasped, stunned, his confidence shattering as her hand closed around his throat. The storm outside roared, but inside the house, there was only silence as his body hit the ground. Celine didn't kill him. Not yet. She crouched over him, studying his eyes as the lightning illuminated his face. These were not the eyes of a desperate thief. They were too focused, too disciplined. He had come for her specifically. She knew that look because she had worn it herself once, and then a whisper escaped his lips before he lost consciousness. A name. Not hers, but one she had not heard in 15 years. A name tied to missions no one outside her unit should have known. Her blood ran cold. Someone had found her. When the intruder's body went still, Celine stood in the wreckage of her living room, the storm howling around her, and felt something she had denied for a decade and a half. The past had not been buried deep enough. Someone had dug it up. And worse, they had sent a messenger to test her. She looked down at her trembling hands, not from fear but from the thrill of a power she thought she had extinguished. Her instincts were awake again, sharper than ever. The woman who ran a bookshop was gone. What remained was never miss. And whoever had come for her would learn, as her attacker had just learned, that you could spend years trying to erase who you once were. But the truth always resurfaces, and when it does, it never misses its mark. The storm had passed by morning, leaving San Isidro wrapped in a heavy mist. Fishing boats rocked in the harbor, their crews cursing the waves, while shopkeepers rolled up shutters and swept rainwater from the cobblestones. To them it was another ordinary day, but for Celine Vera, nothing was ordinary anymore. The body of the man who had broken into her home now lay hidden in the cellar, bound and unconscious, and her carefully constructed life was crumbling like sand under a rising tide. Celine sat at her kitchen table, a half-finished cup of coffee cooling in her hands. Her eyes stayed fixed on the wall clock, ticking steadily toward dawn. She had not slept. She had spent the hours since the attack replaying every detail, his stance, his precision, his final whisper. That name, a name that should have been buried along with her Black Ops career. She remembered the first time she had heard it, spoken in hushed tones during a mission deep in the Hindu Kush. It was not a name but a code name, belonging to a man who had vanished after their unit disbanded. Someone who should not have been able to find her. Yet the intruder had spoken it as though it were a summons, a key meant to unlock the ghost she had become. Celine forced herself to think clearly. Fear was useless, panic was a luxury. She had spent her early years training herself to compartmentalize emotions, to survive on logic when the world turned hostile. She drew a deep breath, counting backward from 10, and let the rhythm settle her. 15 years without a weapon, and her instincts had returned in an instant, that both terrified and reassured her. But she knew this was only the beginning. She rose and descended into the cellar. The intruder was awake now, his wrists and ankles bound with fishing rope, his mouth gagged with a torn strip of cloth, his eyes burned with hatred, but beneath that, she recognized something else, discipline. He was trained, possibly military, though not in the way she had been. His mistakes were small, but enough to show her he was not a master hunter. Still he had known enough to find her. That alone made him dangerous. Celine crouched in front of him, pulling the gag loose. "Who sent you?" she asked, her voice calm, measured. He spat blood onto the floor. "You know who." Her stomach nodded. "Say it." The man's lips curled into a smirk. "The Phantom." The word hit her like a blade twisting in an old wound. The Phantom was not just a ghost from her past, it was the code name of a commander she once followed into fire, a man whose brilliance was rivaled only by his ruthlessness. When their unit dissolved, the Phantom had disappeared without a trace. Rumors swirled, some said he had defected, others whispered he had built something darker in the shadows. Celine had prayed those whispers were lies. "Why now?" she demanded. The intruder only smiled. His silence told her more than words could. The Phantom had waited until she was vulnerable, until she believed she was safe. Celine tightened her grip on his jaw. "If you came here, then you already know what I can do. Tell me why he sent you, or I'll remind you why they called me Never Miss." His smirk faltered then. For a moment, fear flickered in his eyes. But instead of answering, he shifted his gaze toward the cellar window, where dawn's first light broke through the mist. "He'll come for you himself," the man whispered. "And when he does, the world will remember who you really are." Before Celine could press further, his body convulsed. She realized too late that he had something hidden, an implant, perhaps, or a capsule. His eyes rolled back as foam spilled from his lips. She tried to hold him down, to force the seizure to stop, but within seconds, he went still. Dead. Celine staggered back, cursing under her breath. Whoever had sent him had prepared. He was not meant to return alive. He was a messenger, nothing more, a signal flare to draw her out. Now she had a choice. She could vanish again, abandon San Isidro, disappear into another false life, and wait for the Phantom's net to close around her wherever she went. Or she could stop running. She could become the weapon she once was, and face the storm head-on. Her hand trembled as she brushed hair from her face. She had promised herself never again, but promises meant little against the kind of darkness now rising. By the time the sun lifted above the horizon, Celine had made her decision. She burned the intruder's body in the old lighthouse furnace, scattering the ashes into the waves where no one would question them. Then she opened the trunk she had kept sealed for 15 years. Inside lay the remnants of her past, a disassembled rifle, a pair of combat knives, a weathered journal filled with coded mission notes. Her fingers closed around the rifle stock, the weight both foreign and familiar. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. She was no longer Celine the widow, Celine the shopkeeper. She was never Miss, and if the phantom wanted her alive, he would regret not leaving her dead. Still, as she stood in her cellar, the rifle in her hands, one thought haunted her. If he had found her, then it was only a matter of time before others did too. And some of those people were ones she had sworn to protect. The town she had grown to care for, however distantly, might soon become a battlefield. For 15 years, she had hidden her Black Ops past, but the storm had woken it, and now there was no going back. The days that followed felt like walking on the edge of a knife. San Isidro Bay went on with its usual rhythm, children laughing on the docks, the market buzzing with fishermen's wives haggling over the morning catch, and tourists filling the cobblestone streets with chatter. But for Celine Vera, every sound carried weight, every movement in the corner of her eye a possible threat. The intruder's final words clung to her like salt in the air. "The phantom will come." Celine moved through the town like nothing had changed. She brewed coffee for the priest, opened her bookshop, and greeted neighbors with her same polite smile. But beneath the mask, she studied faces and catalogued movements, old instincts sharpened. She watched for patterns in the crowds, noted strangers who lingered too long, and timed her every step so that no one could trace her routines. She had survived 15 years by pretending to be ordinary. That illusion was shattered now. On the third night after the attack, she woke to the faintest sound, a car engine cut off 100 meters away, its headlights briefly flashing through her window before going dark. She sat up instantly, every nerve alert. Her rifle rested on the wall, disassembled, but her knives were close at hand. Quietly, she slipped out of bed, her bare feet soundless against the wooden floorboards. The intruder had not been a warning after all. He had been the first blow. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw two silhouettes moving toward her house. Their pace was deliberate, their spacing precise, military, not amateurs. These weren't burglars or lone wolves, they were hunters. Celine's pulse slowed, her breathing steadying as muscle memory returned. She pulled open the drawer in the kitchen, retrieving a small device she had not touched in over a decade, a thermal lens. She pressed it to her eye, and the world shifted into hues of heat. The two men glowed against the dark, their weapons tucked tight against their sides. They were sweeping the area with caution. They had come to take her alive. Celine didn't wait. She knew that in combat, hesitation was death. She moved like water, slipping through her back door, and circling the house in silence. By the time the men reached her front steps, she was already behind them, a shadow in the storm. The first man never saw her coming. Her knife found the soft space under his arm, angled upward into his chest. He dropped soundlessly, his rifle clattering against the wet stone. The second spun, raising his weapon, but Celine was faster. She struck low, sweeping his legs out from under him, then pressed the blade against his throat before he could call out. "Who sent you?" she hissed, her face inches from his. His breath came fast, his eyes wide. "Orders from above," he stammered. "Above who?" "The phantom." Her heart clenched, though her grip didn't waver. "What does he want?" she pressed. The man swallowed hard, rain mixing with the blood on his face. "He wants proof you're alive. He said you'd never stay hidden forever." Celine's jaw tightened. Proof. That's all she was to the phantom now, a piece of unfinished business. She ended it quickly, a sharp twist of her knife, then dragged both bodies into the storm drain beneath the old bridge. The tide would carry them away before sunrise. She had done this before, too many times. Each movement felt like slipping into an old uniform. She hated how natural it felt. When she returned home, she locked the doors and sank against the wall, her body trembling not with fear, but with rage. For 15 years, she had lived quietly, avoiding war, avoiding blood. But the phantom had found her, and worse, he was sending men who weren't afraid to expose her. That meant he didn't care who else got caught in the crossfire. San Isidro Bay was no longer safe. The next morning, Celine took a long walk through the town. She passed her neighbors, smiled at their greetings, and carried her basket of bread from the bakery. But her eyes scanned rooftops and alleys, mapping escape routes, noting blind spots, imagining how the town would look under siege. For the first time in years, she considered what it might mean to leave. Yet when she saw little Elena, the baker's daughter, running with her toy boat down by the shore, Celine froze. The girl waved at her, laughing, and Celine's heart cracked. She couldn't abandon them, not the people who had unknowingly given her the closest thing to peace she'd ever had. That night, Celine made her decision. She would not run. If the phantom wanted her, he would have to come here. And when he did, she would make sure he regretted dredging her past out of the grave. She retrieved her rifle case, laying out the pieces on her kitchen table. Her hands moved with the same precision they had 15 years ago, assembling the weapon in silence. When the last piece clicked into place, she exhaled slowly, her old self fully awakened. But as she sighted down the scope for the first time in over a decade, Celine whispered a vow to herself. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting San Isidro, about ensuring the people here never knew the storm that had once consumed her world. The phantom had made his first move. She was ready for the next. For days the town of San Isidro Bay basked in its sleepy rhythm, unaware that a silent war had already begun in its shadows. To the fishermen hauling nets at dawn, to the children chasing gulls along the shore, and to the tourists sipping rum on the pier, nothing seemed amiss. But to Celine Vera, every hour was an exercise in vigilance. She no longer saw San Isidro as a place of peace, she saw it as a battlefield waiting to be drawn. The phantom had sent 2 men to confirm she was alive. That meant he was watching, that meant others would follow. She knew the rhythm of escalation, one scout, then a team, then an operation. She had lived it, commanded it, and survived it more times than she cared to count. But if the phantom wanted her alive, she had a slim advantage. Alive meant time, time meant options. Celine spent the next nights preparing, working quietly, methodically, as though she were back in her unit. She dismantled her home piece by piece, hiding weapons in plain sight, a combat knife embedded in the underside of her bookshelf, a disassembled pistol tucked into the false bottom of her bread bin, flash grenades stored inside ceramic flour jars. Every corner of her modest house became a trap. Her training had been built on invisibility, striking before the enemy even realized she was there. And though she had sworn off that life, she knew there was no choice now. The phantom had drawn her out, and she would answer not as Celine the widow, but as Never Miss. Still, part of her resisted. Late at night, when the sea was quiet, and the world seemed distant, she sat on her porch with a glass of rum, and stared at the lights across the bay. She had spent 15 years trying to be someone else, a civilian, a woman who read stories instead of writing them in blood. Each time her fingers curled around a rifle stock, she felt the weight of her broken promise pressing against her chest, and yet, she also felt something she hadn't in years. A clarity, a certainty in her body, that no ordinary life could give her. Her hands did not shake, her mind did not wander. She knew what she was, and denying it had not erased it. The moment came on a Thursday, when the air hung heavy with storm clouds that never quite broke. Celine had been tailing a stranger who had appeared in the market, a man with cropped hair, mirrored sunglasses, and boots too heavy for the cobblestones. She followed him from the bakery to the docks, her pace casual, her expression blank. The man stopped at the harbor's edge, pretending to admire the sea, but his posture screamed surveillance.
Celine slipped behind a stack of nets and watched him. He spoke into a radio hidden in his sleeve. She couldn't hear the words, but she knew the rhythm of reporting. Backup was coming. In another life, she would have vanished. Instead, she closed the distance between them with quiet steps. When the man turned, she struck, her elbow driving into his solar plexus, her hand twisting the radio free. He collapsed against the nets, gasping, and Celine pressed her blade against his throat. "Who are you reporting to?" she demanded. The man coughed, his breath ragged. You're real." His voice shook with awe. The phantom was right. Celine pressed harder. "Answer me." His lips trembled, and finally, he whispered, "The Order of Ash." The name meant nothing to Celine. It wasn't military, wasn't government. It sounded like something else, something hidden. She wanted more, but before she could press him, he made the same mistake the last man had. His eyes fluttered, his body convulsed, and a trace of foam spilled from his mouth. Dead. Celine cursed under her breath. The phantom wasn't just sending hunters, he was sending pawns rigged to die before they could be turned. It was a strategy meant to wear her down, to remind her she was isolated, to deny her information, but he had made a mistake. In his arrogance, he had underestimated her, because Celine had one advantage he didn't know: she wasn't alone. She hadn't told anyone in San Isidro who she truly was, but there were allies from her past, ghosts like her, scattered across the world. People who had also buried their lives, who owed her debts she had never called in. If she reached out, they would answer. That night, Celine opened the old journal she had unearthed from her trunk. Its pages were filled with codes only her former unit would understand. She tore a strip of paper and wrote a single phrase in cipher: "Never miss lives." Then she burned it into an encrypted message, sending it through a channel she hadn't touched in 15 years. As she watched the message leave her laptop, Celine felt her chest tighten. The hidden strength she had buried was not just her precision, her instincts, or her ruthlessness. It was the network she had built, the loyalty she had earned, and the fire that still burned in her veins. If the phantom wanted her, he would find not a widow, but a soldier reborn, and she would not face him alone. For the first time in 15 years, Celine smiled, not with joy, but with the grim satisfaction of someone who knows the storm is coming and welcomes the fight.
For days Evelyn tried to settle back into the quiet rhythm of her life. She tended to her small vegetable garden, cooked simple meals, and walked the gravel path to the nearby town to fetch supplies. But something was different now.
I tree.
The air felt heavier, the shadows longer. Every creak of the wooden floorboards at night made her hand instinctively drift toward the old pistol hidden in her drawer. The attacker had not been ordinary. His movements, his posture, his breathing, even the way he held the knife, told Evelyn something she didn't want to admit. He had training, and worse, he hadn't been improvising. He had been testing her. That meant he knew. He knew she was more than the reclusive woman who lived outside Merrillridge. He knew her hands had once carried out missions buried so deep in classified archives that even governments pretended they didn't exist, and if he knew, others would know soon too. Her past, the one she had buried for 15 years, was clawing its way back into the present. 3 nights later, it happened again. Evelyn woke at 2:14 a.m. to the faint crunch of gravel outside. She didn't move. She slowed her breathing and let the darkness cloak her. Whoever was outside thought they had the advantage. A shadow moved across her window, a flash of steel, then silence. Evelyn slipped from her bed, her steps silent, her body a memory of discipline. She retrieved the pistol, not because she needed it, but because the rules of survival demanded redundancy. She padded to the kitchen and positioned herself behind the heavy oak table. The front door creaked. This time, he brought friends. 2 figures slipped inside, dressed in black, faces obscured. Their movements were coordinated, their communication subtle, a slight nod, a shift of shoulders. These weren't ordinary criminals, they were hunters. But what they didn't realize was that the hunted was already in control. Evelyn waited until they passed into the living room, then struck. She swept the table forward, crashing it into the first man. The second spun, knife flashing, but she was already inside his reach, twisting his wrist until the blade clattered to the floor. She shoved him into the wall with bone-snapping force. The first man lunged, but she fired once, not to kill, but to freeze him. The bullet sank into the wooden frame, inches from his head. He halted, eyes wide. "Who sent you?" Evelyn's voice was low, lethal. The silence stretched. Then the man laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "They were right. You haven't lost your touch." The words chilled her more than the knife ever could. Whoever they were, they had studied her. They had been waiting for her to reveal herself. Before she could react, he smashed a smoke capsule against the floor. The house filled with choking haze. Evelyn coughed once, then dropped low, using memory and instinct to navigate the rooms she knew better than anyone. By the time the smoke cleared, both men were gone, leaving only chaos in their wake. Evelyn stood in the wreckage of her quiet life. It was over. The illusion of normalcy, the fragile cocoon she had woven for 15 years, was shattered. Someone had found her. Someone had remembered what she used to be, and worse, someone wanted to remind the world. That night, Evelyn buried her pistol in the garden again, but this time it wasn't to hide it. She whispered a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years, a code word that belonged to a different life. Then she looked out at the horizon, her jaw set, her heart steady. The war she thought she had left behind was already at her door. And this time, it wasn't just about survival, it was about unfinished business. Mara Edivane had lived enough lives to know when the walls were closing in. After nearly 2 decades of burying her past in the dust of civilian life, she had felt the fragile illusion cracking piece by piece. First the stranger in the cafe who tested her reflexes with bump that wasn't an accident. Then the suspicious job postings that seemed tailored to her background, bait hung out by someone who knew. And finally, the shadow that had followed her for 3 nights straight, moving like a ghost that thought it could outghost her. It wasn't paranoia, it was recognition. Someone was prying at the shell she had worked 15 years to build around herself. On that 4th night, she let him in. Not into her home, she would never compromise her sanctuary, but into the decoy apartment she maintained for contingencies just like this one. No lights, no neighbors who cared, a place where the air tasted of mildew and old paint. She moved through the space like she had memorized every creak, every nail protruding from the warped floorboards. She let herself be seen, just enough, flicking the blinds so the watcher could catch the outline of her figure in the dim light. The trap wasn't in luring him inside, it was in convincing him he was the hunter. He took the bait. At 1:14 a.m., the lock turned with a precision that told her he was no petty thug. His shadow stretched long and distorted across the broken wallpaper as he slid into the apartment. Mara had been still for 20 minutes, crouched in silence with her breathing controlled down to the rhythm of a sleeping body. She remembered training sessions where instructors would hold lit cigarettes to her nostrils just to break her calm, training that built the patience to wait without twitching, without giving the body's natural betrayals away. He moved efficiently, scanning corners, clearing angles, his pistol held low but steady. A professional, not government, not military either. His stance was too loose, his transitions too casual. Mercenary perhaps, or a freelancer who thought he'd stumbled onto a payday. He whispered something under his breath, maybe a self-check phrase, maybe just nerves disguised as routine. Mara knew the kind, skilled, but sloppy in the spaces between. That was where she struck. The fight lasted 7 seconds. 7 seconds between the moment he caught the blur of her movement in his peripheral vision to the moment he was face down with his arm locked in a pressure hold that threatened to break at the elbow. His weapon was on the floor 2 feet away, and his cheek pressed against the dust so hard he could barely breathe. His first instinct wasn't to beg, it was to laugh. A dry, throaty sound that told her pain wasn't new to him. "You never missed, did you?" he said, his voice muffled against the floorboards. The words stilled her hand. It wasn't just recognition, it was confirmation. Whoever this man was, he knew. Mara tightened the hold until she felt the ligaments stretch. "Who sent you?" she demanded, her tone stripped of all civilian softness. He wheezed, coughed, then chuckled again. "You've been out of the field for years. They thought you were just a rumor, but I knew. I had to see it myself." His eyes flicked up at her with a mix of fear and reverence. Blackthorn, the name hit her gut like a punch. Blackthorn was supposed to be buried, dissolved in classified files, erased with dead agents and burned evidence. To hear it spoken out loud, in this filthy apartment, by a stranger, it meant her past wasn't just remembered, it was being resurrected. Before she could press further, the sound of footsteps echoed outside. Too many, too heavy, too coordinated. Not neighbors, not coincidence. Her instincts screamed ambush. She wrenched the man's arm until he yelped, dragging him up as a shield. In one fluid motion, she scooped his pistol from the floor and aimed at the door. The first man through barely had time to register the sight of her before she fired. Controlled bursts, never wasting a shot, each one finding its mark like the years hadn't dulled her precision at all. The room lit up with muzzle flashes, drywall exploding, wood splintering. The mercenary she held as a shield twisted and cursed as bullets meant for her found his vest. She moved with clinical efficiency, not like someone rediscovering old skills, but like someone who had never put them down. When the silence finally fell, 4 bodies lay sprawled in the apartment, their weapons still smoking. Her shield was barely breathing, his vest riddled but intact, his eyes, bloodshot, desperate, fixed on her with something that looked a lot like awe. "You see?" he gasped, never missed. Mara kept the pistol leveled at him, her own breathing calm, steady, as if her body had slipped into a gear it had been waiting 15 years to find again. The civilian life she had built, quiet mornings, neighborhood smiles, the fiction of ordinariness, suddenly felt like a mask she had been suffocating beneath. The truth was out now, and no amount of hiding would put it back. But she wasn't just thinking about herself anymore. If Blackthorn was being dragged back into the light, it meant more than exposure. It meant unfinished wars, enemies who never forgave, ghosts who had been waiting in the dark. Her attacker wasn't the end, he was the opening move. She tightened her grip on the pistol, and leaned close to his ear. "If you want to live, you're going to tell me everything you know, because whoever sent you made a mistake." The man swallowed hard, blood staining his lips. "What mistake?" Mara's eyes hardened, her voice cold as the steel in her hand. "They reminded me who I am." And as she dragged him toward the back exit, stepping over the bodies without hesitation, she felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. For 15 years she had lived as a ghost pretending to be alive. But the world was reminding her that ghosts didn't get to rest, not when enemies whispered the names that should have stayed buried. Not when the hunt had already begun. The past hadn't just caught up. It had come knocking with guns drawn. And Mara Edjuvan, the woman they thought had gone soft, was about to show them why she had never not once missed her target. The city felt different once Elise stepped out of the safe house that morning. The streets bustled with the same rhythm of traffic, the same mix of neon advertisements and coffee vendors, but the undercurrent was tense. She had spent the night listening to encrypted transmissions between operatives who thought themselves unseen. But Elise had heard every code phrase, every mistake that revealed desperation. The network hunting her wasn't just testing her defenses, it was tightening a snare, closing in around her like a wolf pack. She walked with a deliberate calm, weaving through morning crowds with the kind of fluid precision only years of shadow warfare could instill. The ordinary onlookers would never guess she had a compact disassembled rifle hidden in her messenger bag, nor that each reflective surface, a bus window, a shop's display glass, was a canvas where she painted escape routes in her mind. She didn't fear being seen, she feared the one who knew enough to follow without being noticed. By midday, she was already aware of 3 tales. One was a novice, trying too hard to blend in by staring at his phone. Another lingered too far back, his posture betraying military discipline. The third, however, was artful. She only knew he existed because of the silence he left behind, a distortion in the crowd's natural flow. That, more than anything, confirmed what she dreaded.
Someone out there wasn't just assigned to track her.
Oh, someone out there had studied her Black Ops file, every mission, every weakness, every tell.
She ducked into an old library, the kind of place most in the city had forgotten. The smell of ink and paper greeted her like a relic of another world. Elise walked between the rows of books, past shelves heavy with forgotten wars and outdated maps. She needed space to think, but the truth gnawed at her. The team tracking her had numbers, resources, and patience. But she had something they could never replicate, her instinct sharpened by years of silent kills and missions that never officially existed. It was there, in the quiet of the library, that her thoughts drifted back to one mission in particular, the one that had defined her decision to disappear 15 years ago. A desert city, a target she was told was a warlord financing terrorism. But inside the compound she had found not soldiers, but families held as collateral. The orders had been clear: fire, finish, leave nothing behind. Elise had obeyed, because orders weren't questions, they were commands. And when the smoke cleared, she realized her name had been etched in the deaths of innocents. That night, she swore she'd vanish. That no commander, no government, no operation would ever use her trigger finger again. She hid because the ghosts deserved silence. She hid because the truth was unbearable. But now, the ghosts had been unearthed, and her hunters wanted to weaponize them again. Her earpiece crackled, a ghost of her own making. She had tuned into one of the enemy's frequencies hours ago, disguising her presence among their chatter. A single phrase froze her blood: prepare the snare. She enters the circle tonight. Elise knew what that meant. They weren't just tracking her. They had built an environment around her, a false safety, a net that would pull tight once she crossed the invisible threshold. She looked at the exit sign, glowing above the library's old doorframe, and suddenly the building wasn't a sanctuary. It was bait. Instead of leaving, she climbed up the metal staircases, through dusty archives, until she reached the rooftop. From there, the city sprawled beneath her, glowing and alive, unaware that a private war was unfolding above its head. Through her rifle's scope, she scanned intersections, and that's when she saw it. 2 black SUVs idled in different blocks, too symmetrical to be coincidence. A van parked near the library's rear alley, windows tinted, exhaust puffing steady as a heartbeat. And then the figure, her phantom tail, standing across the street, gazing not at her, but at the reflection in the glass. He was watching her through a layer of indirection, as if mocking her awareness. Elise steadied her breathing. If she stayed, the circle would close. If she fled, she'd walk straight into the funnel they had carved. And then through the scope, she caught something else. The man across the street was smiling, not with triumph, but recognition, as if he weren't just a pursuer, as if he were someone who knew exactly why Elise had vanished all those years ago. Her heart pounded, but her hands remained steady. She didn't need clarity yet, she needed survival. So she broke the glass barrier, diving from rooftop to rooftop, every leap timed with the rhythm of the crowd below, to mask her motion. She wasn't running, she was repositioning. By nightfall, Elise had looped back into the industrial quarter of the city, her hunters forced to adjust their net. She knew she couldn't keep slipping forever. At some point the circle would tighten. At some point she'd have to face not just the team pursuing her, but the man who smiled as if he had written her story before she lived it. That thought carried her into the shadows of a warehouse district, where rusted cranes and forgotten containers offered concealment. She crouched in the dark, rifle across her knees, listening to the distant hum of engines circling like predators. The trap was closing, and she was done running. If they wanted the ghost of Elise Mercer, they'd get her. But they'd also learn why she never missed a target, and why hunting her was their final mistake. The night had that stillness that only comes when something is waiting to break it. Rain clung to the rooftops of the coastal city, turning every light into a smear of reflection on the cobblestones. Elena crouched in the shadows of a weathered clock tower overlooking the harbor, watching through her scope, as the men below moved crates onto an unmarked freighter. Each crate was stamped with the insignia she had hoped she'd never see again, the same one burned into the deepest parts of her past. Her heartbeat slowed into the rhythm she had been trained to obey. Breathe in, hold, exhale, align. Her muscles remembered what she had denied herself for 15 years. The rifle rested in her hands like an old friend she had abandoned, now demanding answers. She could almost hear the voices of her instructors, of teammates long buried. Each one told her the same thing: you cannot walk away. Below, she recognized one of the silhouettes, a man with a crooked gait, dragging his leg slightly from an old injury. He had been in one of her missions long ago, a ghost from a battlefield she thought buried with the classified files. Seeing him alive here was not coincidence, it was a message. Elena shifted her scope slightly, observing the harbor perimeter. The freighter wasn't just a smuggling ship. It was a mobile command post, housing communications equipment shielded from detection, guarded by men who moved with the same precision she had once called her own. Whoever orchestrated this was not a mercenary. They were military, trained, and likely tied to the same clandestine networks that had used her and erased her. A faint click reached her ears through her earpiece. Malik, stationed 3 rooftops away, whispered low, "You've got tails, 2 o'clock. Not locals." Elena didn't need confirmation. She could feel it, the tightening of the air, the static that always preceded the strike. Shadows detached themselves from alleyways, men moving in coordinated pairs, advancing on her position. Whoever had set this trap knew her habits well. They knew how she scouted, how she set her perimeter. Which meant someone inside the old files had been reopened. Someone had studied her like prey. She didn't wait. She slid off the tower, landing in a crouch as silenced rounds clipped stone above her. The city exploded into movement. The hunter had become the hunted, but Elena's reflexes were faster. She vaulted into an alley, her body flowing through motions she hadn't practiced in over a decade yet, executed flawlessly. A lifetime of muscle memory doesn't fade. The first attacker rounded the corner, a knife glinting in his hand. Elena grabbed his wrist mid-strike, twisted it until the blade clattered onto the stones, and used his momentum to throw him against the wall. A second lunged, firing suppressed shots, but she had already ducked, rolling beneath his arm and shoving him face first into the brick. The sound of bone cracking under pressure echoed briefly before being swallowed by the rain. Malik's voice cut through the chaos. "They're circling the harbor. This isn't random. They're funneling us." Elena knew. Her eyes tracked the pattern, the way the shadows moved. These weren't common hunters. This was an encirclement straight out of her own field manuals. The playbook was hers, but inverted. Whoever commanded them knew how she thought, and was forcing her into the very kill box she once designed for others. She sprinted across the rooftops, dodging bursts of gunfire, her mind racing. Every escape path closed one after another, as if her enemy was reading her decisions in real time. It dawned on her then, this wasn't about eliminating her. It was about testing her. Whoever was behind the freighter wanted to confirm something, that she hadn't lost her edge. By the time she and Malik regrouped in an abandoned warehouse, both were soaked and breathless. Elena's rifle rested against the wall as she stripped the wet gloves from her hands. Malik paced, frustration carving his expression. "We're not fighting street mercs, Elena. These men, they move like you." Elena's gaze hardened. "That's because they are me. Or at least they were trained in the same doctrine. Black Ardent Doctrine." The name tasted like ash in her mouth. Black Ardent wasn't a unit the world admitted existed. It was a program designed to erase itself, to build soldiers who could vanish and take entire operations with them. If these men were still active, then someone had not only kept the program alive, but had improved it. The implications were heavier than the rifle in her hands. It meant she hadn't simply left the shadows 15 years ago. She had abandoned it, but the shadows had never abandoned her. They had grown, adapted, and now they had come back to measure her worth. Malik stopped pacing. "So what now? We walk away, or you keep chasing ghosts?" Elena's eyes flicked toward the harbor, where the freighter's engines rumbled low like a beast stirring. Her decision solidified. No more ghosts. We end this before it spreads. But deep down, she already knew what that meant. To end it, she would have to become the very thing she had spent 15 years denying. The clock struck midnight in the city, and for the first time in years, Elena Cruz accepted the truth. Her Black Ops past was no longer behind her. It was standing on the perimeter, waiting for her to rejoin it.
The night bled into silence, the kind of silence that carried the weight of graves. Halls. Elira sat alone in a safe house, deep within the crumbling outskirts of Vera, a city once vibrant with color and music, but now hollowed by war and shadow. She had chosen this place for a reason. It was where her first mission as a Black Ops operative had unfolded. The place where she had learned what it meant to kill for something greater than herself. And now, as she waited, it was where she felt the past claw its way back through every crack in the walls. On the table before her lay a single black file, marked only with an insignia, a hawk's eye, cut through by a diagonal blade. The mark of the specters. Inside were names, locations, dead drops, and one name that had been burned into her soul since the day she defected. Mark Dahl. He wasn't just her former commander, he was the man who had turned her into a weapon, and the one who had sold her out when she walked away. Now she knew he was here, in Vera, leading a ghost network that extended far beyond assassinations. He was moving money, weapons, and influence across borders, weaving himself into governments like a parasite. Her past hadn't just returned, it had been waiting for her. Elira's fingers hovered over the names, but she closed the file. She didn't need them. She didn't miss. Not once. Not ever. The door creaked behind her. Kalen stepped in, his presence carrying a weariness born not from fear, but from knowing too much. "You went silent on the comms," he said, dropping a duffel bag at her feet. "Almost made me think you were gone." Elira didn't look up. "I had to remember why I started this," she replied. And, her gaze finally met his. Cold, precise. "I remembered the night I killed my first Mark." He wore the face of a father, a shopkeeper, but when he opened his mouth, he recited orders meant to slaughter villages. "I ended him before he could finish the sentence." Kalen swallowed. "Mark trained you to cut out hearts and call it survival," he said. "You don't need to carry his shadow anymore." Elira shook her head. "No, I don't carry his shadow. I carry his scar. And scars don't fade when you ignore them." The silence stretched. Kalen sat opposite her, eyes narrowing as if weighing the truth against the danger. Then he leaned forward. "You're planning something big, aren't you?" Elira's lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. "I'm not planning survival this time," she said. "I'm planning erasure." The next night, Vera roared back to life in fire and smoke. A shipment of arms meant for Mark's network erupted on the docks, lighting the river with crimson reflections. At the same time, coded transmissions slipped from Elira's fingers into open air, spilling Mark's operations to rival governments, mercenary bands, even fractured cells of rebels. Within an hour, the city pulsed with hunters who didn't even know whose leash they were on, and all of them were converging on one man. Elira moved through the storm like it was her element. Her body remembered the rhythm of infiltration, the quiet breaths, the way to glide between lamplight and shadow, the small flex of her trigger finger that never trembled. But beneath the familiar movements, something new pulsed. She wasn't just hunting Marker. She was hunting the part of herself he had left behind. Every step was a confrontation, every heartbeat was a question. Was she still his weapon, or had she become her own? The final approach came at dawn. Mark had holed himself in a fortified mansion on the northern ridge, ringed with hired guns who didn't realize they were standing on the edge of extinction. From the rooftop of a ruined chapel across the ridge, Elira knelt, her scope trained on a window where shadows shifted inside. She could see him, older now with lines carved deep into his face, but still bearing that unshakable aura of command. The aura that had once broken her, then rebuilt her into something unrecognizable. Her finger curled around the trigger. She could end him now, erase 15 years of buried scars with one breath, but as the thought sharpened so did another. This wasn't about one man. Mark was a thread. If she pulled it now, the rest of the network would knot itself tighter, vanishing into deeper shadows. She needed him alive. She needed him to know. The crosshairs hovered, then she pulled back. Hours later, the mansion's gates buckled inward under a stolen transport truck. Gunfire ripped through the hallways, men shouting in panic as smoke bombs rolled along the floors, and through the chaos, Alira walked. Silent, cold, one shot to the left, one shot to the right. Her path carved itself in precision, until she stood at the heart of the mansion, where Mark waited. No guards, no weapons in hand, just him, sitting in the same posture he had used when she was a young recruit, as if nothing had changed. "Alira," he said, his voice carrying the same calm it always had. "You never missed a target. Not once. Even now you haven't missed me. You've come home." Alira's chest tightened, not from fear, but from fury. "This was never home," she spat. Mark leaned forward, eyes sharp, mouth curling. "It was, and it always will be. You can burn Vera. You can bleed the specters, but you'll never erase what you are. You are me." Alira raised her weapon. The silence between them stretched until it felt like the whole world held its breath. Her finger brushed the trigger, and then she lowered the gun. "Wrong," she said. "I'm not you. I'm what happens when your creation turns against its maker." Mark's smirk faltered, just for a moment, and in that moment, Alira knew she hadn't missed. Not a shot, not a step, not a choice, because this was never about killing him. It was about killing the hold he had on her. And in his silence, she knew she had already won. But the war wasn't over. Mark was alive, and that meant the world was about to burn. And this time, Alira was ready to light the match herself. For years Selene Vega believed she had outrun the ghosts of her past. She had learned to walk among ordinary people, to blend into a rhythm of quiet routines, safe smiles, and conversations that never touched the blood-soaked shadows behind her eyes. But the truth was, the past had not disappeared. It had simply been waiting. It lurked in every unexpected sound, every unfamiliar silhouette on a darkened street. And tonight, with the air sharp and the silence too still, Selene realized the past had finally caught up. She stood at the heart of an abandoned port warehouse, her attacker, no longer a stranger, but someone who had learned far too much, limping across the cracked concrete floor. His name didn't matter. What mattered was what he knew. He had peeled back the thin veil of her carefully constructed life, and seen the truth beneath. He knew why she never missed a target. He had seen her eyes steady against chaos, her hands calm as death. He knew now that she wasn't some former soldier or a wayward veteran who had gotten lucky. She had been something else entirely. The man coughed, spitting blood onto the floor, but his voice still carried. "You're not supposed to exist. Black Ops buried your program. They said you were ghosts." Selene didn't flinch. Ghosts don't leave survivors. Her words cut through the cavernous silence, sharp as the knife she held low at her side. She moved with the predatory ease of someone who had done this too many times to count. Every step echoed her training, every breath timed like a machine. She wasn't just a woman who had been taught to kill. She was a weapon forged to vanish, to erase herself the moment after the trigger was pulled. And yet here she stood, cornered between two lives, one she had built on lies, and one she had buried in graves no one dared to visit. The attacker's laugh was ragged, delirious from pain, but it carried the kind of certainty that made Selene's blood chill. "They'll come for you now, you know that, don't you? I'm just the first, you're not hidden anymore. 15 years of pretending, and it ends tonight." Selene's grip tightened on the knife. For a heartbeat she considered silencing him forever. That was what the program had taught her. Leave no trace, no witness, yet a flicker of something human, something she had fought to reclaim in her years of self-imposed exile, made her hesitate. She wasn't the same weapon she had been forged into, or at least, she wanted to believe she wasn't. But deep down, she understood the truth. His words weren't a threat. They were a prophecy. The warehouse creaked around them, the sound of the ocean outside slamming against the docks. Selene could smell the rust, the salt, and the faint copper of blood drying on the ground. Her mind sharpened, cataloging every possible exit, every shadow where more enemies could be waiting. The program had burned paranoia into her bones, but tonight it wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. If he had found her, others could too. If he had uncovered her past, then her years of anonymity were already gone. She stepped closer, her voice calm, but carrying a weight that stilled even his trembling frame. If they come for me, they'll learn what you did, that I don't miss, that I don't forget. The attacker tried to sneer, but the fear beneath his expression betrayed him. He had thought exposing her past would break her, that reminding her of who she had been would unravel the fragile mask she wore in civilian life. Instead, it had reignited something buried too long, something dangerous. Celine leaned close, her whisper like the cold press of steel. Tell them I'm still out here, tell them the ghost still breathes, and when they come, tell them to run. With a swift motion, she dropped him, alive but broken, knowing he would crawl back to whoever had sent him. It wasn't mercy, it was strategy. Fear would travel faster than bullets. As she slipped into the night, Celine understood there was no turning back. The quiet life she had built, the illusion of safety, had been shattered. Every skill she had tried to bury was once again a blade she would have to wield. The world would soon remember the name Celine Vega, and when they came for her, she would be ready. The rain-slick rooftops of Corvallis glistened under the flicker of neon, and for the first time in years, Elena Serrano wasn't running. She was hunting. Her enemy wasn't some faceless contractor or nameless operative this time. It was Victor Drahl himself. The man who had betrayed her unit 15 years ago. The man who had tried to silence her when she broke cover, and now the man who had sent assassins to her door, forcing her to resurrect the ghosts she had buried. For weeks she had followed whispers, encrypted chatter, stolen surveillance feeds, underworld smugglers, muttering about a Black Ops phantom circling back into the game. Now she had him cornered. Drahl was hosting a secret summit with arms financiers, in an abandoned steel foundry outside the city. Elena's breath came slow, her focus razor-sharp. Every weapon tucked on her body was familiar, like an old friend greeting her hand after years apart. Inside the foundry throbbed with life. Mercenaries stood guard in black tactical armor, their rifles sweeping shadows. Drahl moved among them with arrogance, untouched by time, his scarred face stretched in a smile. Elena watched from the rafters above, her rifle sight locked on his temple. One squeeze, one breath. 15 years of pain would end. But Elena didn't pull the trigger, not yet. She wanted Drahl to see her, to know who had come. She wanted him to feel that old fear before she took it away forever. Dropping down into the chaos, she landed with silent precision, snapping the first guard's neck before his rifle even leveled. Alarms rang out. Mercenaries rushed like a tide of black armor, but Elena was faster, dancing between steel beams, bullets sparking off rust. For every shot they fired, 2 of theirs fell. She never missed, and then across the din of gunfire, their eyes met. Drahl's smile faltered. He whispered her name like it was a curse. Elena Serrano. For the first time in 15 years, he realized why she was the ghost. No one escaped. The mercenaries lay broken across the foundry floor, and Drahl backed himself toward the center scaffolding, clutching a pistol like it could save him. Elena stalked forward, gun raised but eyes locked only on him. Her heart pounded, but it wasn't rage alone, it was memory. Memory of her unit's last mission, memory of being left behind. You killed them, she said, her voice calm, steady. All of them, my family. Drahl sneered, though his hand trembled. Collateral, that's all they were. You of all people should know what it takes to keep control. You were the best shot we ever had, Elena. Precision like yours was meant for the shadows, not civilian life. Elena circled him, each step a drumbeat of finality. I buried that life. 15 years I tried to forget it, but you wouldn't let me. He chuckled darkly. You think this ends with me? I wasn't the only one,
The whole chain of command signed off, and they're still out there, still pulling strings. You can kill me, but it won't stop what's already in motion. His words landed heavy, but Elena didn't flinch. She had spent years trying to hide from her past, but deep down she knew the mission was never over. Drawl was only the beginning. She lowered her weapon slightly, not to spare him, but to make him talk. Names, files. Where? His smirk returned, faint but bitter. Even if I told you, you'd never get to them. You're just one woman against an empire. Elena tilted her head, steadying her aim again. One woman is all it takes. The shot echoed through the foundry, cutting Drawl's words short forever. Silence fell. Elena stood among the ruins of her past, knowing that while Drawl's body lay cold, his warning rang true. She had pulled herself back into the war she once abandoned, and this time, she wouldn't walk away. The night stretched long as Elena walked away from the foundry, its twisted steel still echoing the fight she had unleashed. For the first time in 15 years, she didn't feel like she was hiding. She felt exposed. Chosen. Every step away from the battlefield was also a step deeper into war. Her safe house burned behind her, compromised. Her alias was useless now. She had left too many bodies, too many clues, and too much blood in her wake. The underworld knew. The intelligence networks knew. The Phantom had a name again, Elena Serrano, but with the weight of exposure came clarity. She had tried to live as though she were ordinary, as though she were just another citizen in a city that didn't look twice at her. But ordinary people don't break apart hit squads in their living room. Ordinary people don't carve through mercenaries in silence. She had never been ordinary. She was Black Ops, sharpened and scarred, trained to vanish, trained to strike. And though she once hated that truth, she now embraced it. Elena sat on a train, out of Corvallis, hood low, rifle case at her side. She looked out at the darkness rushing past. Somewhere, hidden in vaults and encrypted servers, was the truth Drawl tried to bury. The names of the men who sanctioned her unit's slaughter. The architects who turned soldiers into disposable assets, and she would find them. As the train thundered through the night, she whispered the vow she had buried long ago. One by one, I will never miss. Somewhere across the world, in boardrooms and bunkers, powerful men shifted uneasily, sensing the tremor in the shadows. They had heard the stories once, of a woman who never missed a target. They thought she was gone, but the ghost had returned. And she would not stop, until the last name was crossed from her list. Elena Serrano vanished into the night, not as a civilian hiding from her past, but as the legend reborn. For 15 years she hid her Black Ops life. But now her enemies would learn the truth. She was the ghost who never missed. Elena stood on the roof of the derelict cathedral, as the storm clouds tore across the city skyline, the wind carrying the scent of rain, and something heavier, blood and betrayal. The safe house had been burned, the traitor within her circle flushed out, and her allies scattered to avoid the web closing around them. Now everything converged into this one night. Her past and present had collided, and there would be no retreat. The shadow network she had once worked for, the Directorate, had finally made its move. They had sent their best, operatives who, like her, had been molded from brokenness into weapons. They weren't nameless assassins or disposable agents, they were her equals. They were the only ones who might actually bring her down. And the knowledge of it carried a strange finality, a whisper that this was where her second life ended, or where she would finally sever the invisible leash around her neck. She checked the sniper rifle laid out beside her, but it wasn't her weapon of choice tonight. This wouldn't end from 2 rooftops away with a silent shot. This was close quarters, steel and blood, fists and memory. The kind of fight where every scar earned meaning. Alea knew the Directorate wanted her alive, broken, paraded as a warning to other deserters. That wasn't going to happen. If they wanted to cage her, they'd only find pieces left. The bell of the cathedral tolled midnight. From the alleys below, shapes moved like shadows come alive. 6 operatives, armored and ghostly, their movements too precise to belong to common hunters. Their footsteps were inaudible against the rain-soaked stone. Alara watched them fan out, forming a perimeter before 2 broke off toward the staircase that led to her position. They thought they were surrounding a target, but she had already been studying them for 10 minutes. Already knew the rhythm of their steps, the way they checked corners, the way they breathed. They weren't just hunters, they were prey, too. The first man reached the top of the staircase. He barely had time to raise his suppressed pistol before Alara was on him. She twisted his wrist until the gun clattered onto the roof, then drove her elbow into his throat, crushing his windpipe with brutal precision. She used his collapsing body as cover against the second operative, drawing his own blade from his sheath and burying it under his arm, where the armor joint met flesh. His blood splashed warm against her hand as she pushed him away silently. 2 down, 4 to go. The rain poured harder, lightning cracked the sky. The remaining operatives closed in, but they moved differently now, hesitant, unsure. She had sent a message with those first kills. She wasn't running, and she wasn't afraid. Alara picked up the rifle now, but not to snipe from afar. She swung it like a staff, slamming the butt into a third operative's temple, cracking his visor. He dropped, spasming. She pivoted and fired the weapon point blank into the chest of the fourth. The shot thundered across the rooftops, echoing through the night. That left 2. And these 2 were different. She recognized their stances instantly. The way they circled her, never breaking eye contact, weapons lowered in deceptive calm. They weren't just Directorate soldiers, they were from her unit. Ghost Viper unit, Black Section. Her family once, before betrayal, turned them into her executioners. She could see it in their eyes, even behind their masks. She knew. They weren't here to capture her. They were here to test her, to see if the legend still breathed. Alara, one of them, finally spoke, his voice modulated but unmistakable. It should have ended years ago. You know what happens to deserters. Her hands flexed. The weight of the blade she still held trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the ghosts pressing down on her spine. Then let's finish what they started, she said. Her voice was steady, but her heart roared. This wasn't just survival, this was justice. For the years stolen, for the blood spilled. For every night she woke in cold sweats, hearing the Directorate's commands echoing in her skull. The 2 operatives lunged in perfect synchronicity, blades drawn. The rooftop became a storm of flashing steel, bodies colliding with lethal precision. Alara ducked under one strike, parried another, spun low, and drove her knee into a rib cage. But these weren't disposable enemies. They adapted, countered, and pressed her into retreat. Sparks flew as blades scraped against concrete. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the chaos. A war not just of bodies, but of memories. The battle raged for what felt like hours. By the end, Alara's body screamed with bruises, cuts and exhaustion. Yet she stood tall, while the 2 lay broken before her, gasping in disbelief. She leaned over them, rain dripping down her bloodied face, and whispered, "I never miss." Then she plunged a blade into the rooftop beside their heads. A message: she could have killed them. But tonight wasn't about execution, it was about liberation. She had severed the chains. The Directorate no longer owned her. And with their best hunters defeated, she knew they had only one choice left. They would come for her themselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.